The 19th century prayers and songs of the Scottish Hebrides Islands weave together a history of Gaelic folklore and Celtic traditions with Christian theology. This unique history and blend of cultures may still be felt and seen in the worship traditions and in various aspects of Scottish and island culture yet today. The Hebrides Islands are made up of over 100 islands. 36 of the islands are currently inhabited. Many traditions of the islands and highlands of Scotland were passed down by storytelling, poems, and songs shared from generation to generation. Examining the rich history and culture that can be found in these stories and songs provides insight about the dynamics, the gains, and the losses involved when Christianity entered into a community with a goal of conversion. The hymns, songs, stories, and prayers of the Hebrides Islands can be found within the Garmina Gadelica. But before we delve into the Garmina Gadelica and to further understand the origins of those songs and hymns, we must look back and try to discover the history of the Hebrides Island and Scottish Highlands. Since the Garmina Gadelica is made up of Gaelic, Celtic, and Christian aspects, we should try to better understand how these traditions originated in this part of the world. Earliest historical data suggests that the Gaelic people came from Ireland around 500 AD as an invading force under King Fergus Mór. This long-held historical assumption is currently challenged by archaeological evidence, which suggests that this Gaelic culture already existed in Scotland before their arrival. It is now more likely understood that King Fergus Mór, a Gaelic king, went to Scotland to cooperate with other Gaelic clans. The Celtic people were ultimately the collective group of people who spoke the Celtic languages. It is unknown when this language came into use, though oldest evidence predates it to 1200 BC. This language varied from clan to clan throughout the Britain regions. Each clan had its own dialect and customs. This made the Celtic people both unified and distinct in their culture and traditions. Bishop Ninian, or eventually Christian Saint Ninian, founded the monastery at Whithorn in the Briton territory in AD 500. He was the one who sought to bring Christianity to the pagan Gaelic and Celtic people. Later, in 563, St. Columba was granted the Isle of Iona to found a monastery. It is reported that for Gaelic warrior kings, Columba was a useful asset. His monastery provided education for the king's sons. Columba was a close advisor to the king, and he served as a diplomat in relationships to king's neighbors in Pictland and Ireland. Columba's blessing was treasured by kings, a powerful symbol of their authority, and in return for Columba's support, the Gaels gave the monastery land and protection. It is from these small beginnings that Christianity eventually began to thrive and flourish in Scotland. In 749, however, Viking raiders gained power and control, forcing Christianity to go underground for a time and also destroying the Iona monastery. Near the end of the 11th century, reform and rooting out heresy became a main focus of the Church in Rome. With a renewed sense of moral purpose and authority, these reformed orders, such as the Augustinians and the Benedictines, sought to create uniformity across Christendom. In the 16th century, the European Reformation created much conflict in Scotland between the Protestants and Catholics. Initially, Scotland remained very loyal to the Catholic Church. However, politics and circumstance forced a nation to officially unite under the Catholic banner. When Henry VIII converted to Protestantism, he took most of the English nation with him. James V of Scotland worked with the Catholic Church and the Pope, gaining access to wealth in exchange for a commitment to the Catholic Church. After his death, he left no male heir. Instead, he had only a daughter, Mary, Queen of Scots. seeking to ally themselves with the Scottish nation, both England and France sought to have their male heirs marry the new queen. England represented the Protestant cause, while France was loyal to the Catholic Church. During what is historically called the rough wooing, England sought to force Mary to choose England via threats of war and actual violence, while France funded and supported Scottish retaliation. In the end, the French triumphed. However, John Knox, leader of the Protestant Revolution, in cooperation with Scottish Protestant nobility, encouraged and eventually adopted the Protestant standard, ignoring their queen. This tension eventually led to the signing of the National Covenant at Greyfriars Church in Edinburgh. This covenant reduced the influence and power of the monarchy in Scotland. Specifically, the National Covenant demanded the removal of bishops who blindly served monarchy in matters of church and state. This was very limiting to the powers of monarchy in Scotland. Numerous sources report that a Celtic revival began as early as the 17th century and definitively existed within the 18th and 19th centuries. Though many of the practices and beliefs were driven underground and deemed pagan or heretical, these traditions were still kept secretly and orally passed down within the customs and daily practices of the Celtic generations that followed. Ironically, though the Celtic revival, as it has been named, was not started by those who kept the traditions alive, but instead by those of English-speaking heritage who sought to preserve and protect this once proud heritage. It was within this Romantic era thinking that Alexander Carmichael began to collect his stories in the Scottish Highlands and Isles. In many ways, this Celtic revival is still continuing. Alexander Carmichael brought together the most complete and detailed collection of these songs, hymns, and prayers, and published them in 2 volumes of the Garmina Gadelica. There are 4 additional volumes of the Garmina Gadelica that were published after Carmichael's death. These were published by his descendants and other academics, and they were based on Carmichael's research and writings. However, for the purposes of this video, we will be focusing on Carmichael's original 2 volumes. The songs and prayers, poems and hymns acknowledge and celebrate and lament and plead for every aspect of the lives and for their community. Concerns, hopes, and joys were shared with one another and lifted up to the Creator through the song and prayer. Obviously, they would have prayers and hymns for birth and death, and for baptisms and weddings. They would also have prayers and songs for daily meals and bedtime blessings, consecration of sleeping and bathing. There were also prayers for their concerns of justice and for their community leaders. Throughout the Garmina Gadelica, we can also find prayers for farming needs, including protection of cattle and milking blessings, and even prayers for planting and protection for all aspects of their lives. A prayer for grace. I am bending my knee in the eye of the Father who created me, in the eye of the Son who died for me, in the eye of the Spirit who cleansed me, in love and desire. Pour down upon us from heaven the rich blessing of thy forgiveness. Thou who art uppermost in the city, be thou patient with us. Grant to us, thou Savior of glory, the fear of God, the love of God, and his affection, and the will of God to do on earth at all times, as angels and saints do in heaven. Each day and night give us thy peace. Each day and night give us thy peace. It's important to note that these songs, hymns, and prayers were not written down. This was part of an oral tradition. Alexander Carmichael took the time to learn and to listen when he recorded the Garmina Gadelica so that we would have these hymns and songs and prayers for all times. Alexander Carmichael was born on the 1st day of December in 1832 on the Isle of Lismore in Argyllshire. He began to earn a living as an exciseman or tax collector. He would travel the countryside, going from home to home, from town to town, collecting and enforcing the tax laws. This job created an opportunity for Alexander Carmichael to travel the lands of the Scottish Hebrides Isles and form relationships and connections with many throughout the area. He began collecting and recording the folklore and tradition of the Gaels during these travels. In the introduction of the Garmina Gadelica, Alexander Carmichael describes the people of the Outer Isles. He's quoted as saying, "They are good to the poor, kind to the stranger, and courteous to all. During all the years that I lived and traveled among them, night and day, I never met with incivility, never with rudeness, never with vulgarity, never with aught but courtesy. I never entered a house without the inmates offering me food or apologizing for their want of it." Carmichael gave credit in his introduction to a man named Kenneth Morrison for much of the folklore he acquired. Kenneth had shared that the stories had been passed down through his parish, and storytelling kept pieces of the tales, poems, and songs alive, since these had not yet been printed. Time and lack of printed material were not the only contributors to the oppression and threat of fading of the Gaelic oral literatures. Carmichael states that the Reformation, the risings, the evictions, the disruption, the schools, and the spirit of the age were all contributions. Carmichael states that converts in religion and politics are apt to be intemperate in speech and rash in action. The Reformation movement condemned the beliefs and cults tolerated and assimilated by the Celtic Church and the Latin Church. He specifically points at the school's role and says ignorant school teaching and cleric narrowness have been painfully detrimental to the expressive language, wholesome literature, manly sports, and interesting amusements of the Highland people. In one interview, Carmichael noted a story by a woman who remembered the pain involved when she joined in celebrating Gaelic tradition. She states, "When we came to Islay, I was sent to the parish school to obtain a proper grounding in arithmetic. I was charmed with the schoolgirls and their Gaelic songs, but the schoolmaster, an alien like myself, denounced Gaelic speech and Gaelic songs. On getting out of the school one evening, the girls resumed a song they'd been singing the previous evening. I joined willingly, if timidly, my knowledge of Gaelic being small. The schoolmaster heard us, however, and called us back. He punished us till the blood trickled from our fingers, although we were big girls with the dawn of womanhood upon us. The thought of that scene still thrills me with indignation." Carmichael shares of the difficulty that he faced trying to gather information from Lewis of the Hebrides in his statement. "It was with extreme difficulty that I could obtain any information on the subject of my inquiry, because it related to the foolish past rather than to the sedate present, to the secular affairs rather than the religious life of the people." Carmichael continues to share examples of communities that were led to do away with music and stick only with Christian scriptures. He gives an example of a man that was a famous violin player on one of the islands who was denounced by his preacher for playing the fiddle with a cold hand and devil's fire within. So his family forced him to burn his fiddle and never play again. In an interview, the man had shared that the fiddle had been made by a pupil of Stradivarius himself. The man lamented, "It was not at all the thing that was got for it that grieved my heart so sorely, but the parting with it, the parting with, and that I myself gave the best cow in my father's fold for it when I was young." Carmichael described the exchange and said that the voice of the old man faltered and a tear fell. He was never again seen to smile. Alexander Carmichael was able to preserve for generations a vast and rich amount of literature, which offers many new images and expressions unique to the Scottish Hebrides Isles and Highlands. Even now, over 100 years after the death of its author, the Garmina Gadelica is not the work of one man, but instead is a collection of ancient origins authored by thousands over the centuries. It is due to this vast ancestry that the text continues to remain invaluable to those of the Scottish and Greater Celtic traditions, as well as for the rest of humanity, as this text offers a rare and unique perspective to the greater conversation of human thought and understanding of relationship to one another and to God. Many of the prayers and poems of the Carmina Gadelica have been integrated into worship and liturgy in churches throughout the world. The Carmina Gadelica also included many songs, prayers, and hymns for seasonal celebrations. Some of these were noted as Christmas chants or New Year's blessings or a May Beltane blessing or even the celebration for the Day of St. Columba. One example is this poem about the shepherd of the flock was born. That night the star shone, was born the shepherd of the flock, of the Virgin of the 100 charms, the Mary Mother, the Trinity eternal by her side, in the manger cold and lowly. Come and give tithes of thy means to the healing man, the foam white bristling beloved, without one home in the world, the tender holy babe forth driven, Emmanuel. Ye three angels of power, come ye down, to the Christ of the people, give ye salutation. Kiss ye hands, dry ye his feet, with the hair of your heads, and O thou world-pervading God, and ye, Jesu, Michael, Mary, do not ye forsake us. While we are grateful for the many words that were captured from these traditions, Carmichael himself lamented that he was not able to capture the distinct individuality of the Celtic Church hymn music itself. We aren't exactly sure how it all sounded. He describes the uniqueness of the music and the culture by saying mirth and music, song and dance, tale and poem pervaded their lives as electricity pervades the air. Religion, pagan or Christian, or both combined, permeated everything, blending and shading into one another like the iridescent colors of the rainbow. The Carmina Gadelica, the work which was begun by Alexander Carmichael and the work of those who follow, will continue to influence and shape both the Christian and spiritual practices of many. Research and study of Alexander Carmichael's humble investigations is ongoing and continues to be sponsored by the University of Edinburgh's Carmichael Watson Project. This project has received many grants and achieved support from notable historical societies. The Carmichael Watson Project aims to unlock the Carmina Gadelica, considering it to be one of the world's major folklore resources. They believe that continuing to gain insight from these works will benefit academic scholars and the wider community, guaranteeing that future generations will be able to study, grow, and learn from the teachings of Gaelic ancestors.